Hey, it's Amethyst Virgo. Welcome back. If you are not yet subscribed to my other channel, I do some readings on there. Go to Amethyst Virgo Readings. It is also linked on this YouTube page. Also, I'm on TikTok now, Amethyst Virgo Astrology. I sometimes post some things on that I may not post on here. So, right. I want to talk about the moon because we talk a lot about the sun typically. And the moon is very important for us understanding our inner urges, our inner self, our true motivations, what makes us feel comfortable. I don't really want to go into a whole list because I have several videos where I talk more about this and the moon through the houses, moon through, moon signs. I have all of that already. But I did want to add a layer to this and talk about your moon sign and the environment you probably grew up with. And our moon sign helps us understand our nurturing. It helps us understand our needs. And it also can help us understand the type of mother we had or the type of upbringing that we had. And I'm pretty sure I've already talked about this or hinted at this at some point. I did do a little Mother's Day short last Mother's Day. But I want to talk about moon signs because it's going to help us understand our experiences, right? So, for example, I'll start with my own moon sign. After some reflection, think about moon and Sagittarius, right? And so if you want the direct definition, you can feel free to go to one of my videos where I talk more about moon signs specifically, but the moon and Sag. When you have a moon and Sagittarius, typically, and I've done some research and I looked at people with moon and Sag, you're going to literally sometimes have a mother who is religious, or a mother or upbringing, someone in the family is religious or spiritual. Now, I was not raised in a overly religious home to the point that I had to go to church every week. Not at all, actually. Especially as we got older, like teenagers, like my mom would go to church by herself. She didn't force me and my brother to go. And I think that for my mother, it was a very private experience for her. However, when I look back at my house growing up, I'm like, we had religious things everywhere. No, I'm not. And it wasn't always obvious. It wasn't always an obvious thing, right? So what I mean is it's not like every time you turn, you saw something religious, but it would be certain things like a scripture, or she would have some type of an artifact, or there would be some type of cross somewhere. So, but if you look deep enough, you see there's a religious type of hope and optimism and positive sayings and things in the household that really try to bring some level of belief. And so looking back, I'm like, you would have to look closely, but there were so many religious or spiritual messages in my household growing up in terms of how she decorated the house, how she decorated her own bedroom, right? But it wasn't a household where I felt indoctrinated by religion, right? I didn't feel shut in. Of course, when you grow up in a certain household, there's this assumption that you're Christian, right? So I do think there was a point in time we talked about religion and we weren't on the same page, but I never felt that I couldn't practice my spiritual beliefs. My mom let me, she bought me my first set of tarot cards. She had astrology books. So she wasn't a person that was so into religion that she ignored the other side of things. So I'm not saying that has to be every moon and Sag person's experience, but you typically going to have a parent that brings belief into your life, morals and values, or a certain type of hope or optimism. And that can work well for some people because if it aligns already with who you are, you're going to adapt to that. For some people with the moon Sag, it can feel different, where you might have felt that you were being told what to believe, and some people rebel against being brought up in certain households. So if your moon is in Sagittarius, you likely grew up in some type of family structure where there's a lot of belief or optimism in the home. Now, again, you have to look at the other details of your chart and your family, whoever raised you. Some people are not raised by their mother, their biological mother. Because for some people, it could have been I was raised by a religious zealot, right? Or I was raised in a household where I couldn't question my beliefs, right? So people are going to have different experiences with that. Or you could feel like your parent was so into these beliefs, they weren't paying attention to the things you needed. Hey, I felt like I went without, not me, but some people may say, I felt like I went without material things that I needed, because there was this idea of just pray it away, right? And a lot of people in certain cultures and communities can relate to that kind of upbringing, right? Pray it away, just believe in God. And some people are well, you also have to put the work in too. So that is what you might have experienced if you have a moon in Sag. There's some kind of upbringing that reinforces your beliefs, pushes you to have to find your own beliefs, or in some way, shape, or form, you could even distance yourself from your family's belief system. I'm not going in order. I'm going in the order of the moon signs that I feel like I want to discuss the most. Moon and Aquarius. People of Moon and Aquarius typically grow up sometimes in atypical family structures, or you were born at a time where the family structure was different, or the family structure was not yet stable, or there's something odd about the way you grew up. For example, like a person who's like, yeah, I was a surprise kid. Like I have your older siblings are all like 15, 18 years older than you, right? And you're the youngest. That would be like a Moon and Aquarius person. But typically a Moon and Aquarius person is going to grow up with a parent. One of the parents is, and sometimes the mother, sometimes it's the father, depends. Again, a chart reading would explain all this. But the moon, if you're a Moon and Aquarius, you had freedom growing up. And for some people, it was like good, but for some people, you could have felt like you could grow up very early. As a reminder, Aquarius is traditionally ruled by Saturn, right? And Saturn is all about discipline and maturity and responsibilities. So Moon and Aquarius can sometimes grow up feeling like a lot was placed on them, right? Or they had to be really independent in some way, shape, or form. They felt different than everyone else. But the parent themselves, a lot of times you see someone from an Aquarius, you might have also grown up in a family where there was technology. So let me give an example. Technology is going to be a theme. I know someone from an Aquarius, and they talk a lot about early in life. Like they didn't have a lot of money, but they always had like the latest video games. Like their parent always made sure they had the latest video system, whatever that was. Also, what's very interesting, Moon and Aquarius, like even my mom was a Moon and Aquarius, and she grew up, with her mom, her dad, her siblings. But her grandmother was my grandmother's mother, lived with them as well, and she was really close to her, and so that is sometimes an example. When Aquarius, there's somebody extra in the family home, or there's some other influence. I've seen that a lot with another person that I know. They also, their grandmother raised them for part of their life. So sometimes when Aquarius people, they can be raised with both parents, but sometimes they can be raised differently, or they're closer to somebody, and the grandparent, maybe not the parent, or something like that. But also, I remember my mom telling me when she was younger, her uncle worked for a company, and I really forget the name of all of it. I guess maybe it was one of the electric companies. They're not electric, computer, not TV companies or something. And she was like, we were one of the first Black families on our block to have a TV in our home. And I found that interesting because that's very Moon and Aquarius, right? Like this technology at the time when she was born, like that was a long time ago. But when you think of that frame of reference, so the Moon and Aquarius person grows up in a household where there's a lot of, sometimes there can be some shifts, there can be some sudden things happening, there can be different dynamics within the family home. You may grow up feeling different for some reason. You're the oldest, you're the youngest. You don't look like everybody, the other siblings. There's usually something with the Moon and Aquarius experience, right? Where you are, you're also sometimes treated very as independent, whether you like it or not. Because some people like it and they're like, yep, my parent trusted me. They didn't smother me, with rules. They let me do what I want to do. Some people sometimes can have a strange relationship with certain people, their parents, or some people can feel like I had too much freedom, right? Some people can be like, in the Moon Aquarius, sometimes energy is interesting how it comes off, because it is very, I find they pay attention a lot to their obligations, but I also like sometimes Moon Aquarius does sometimes feel like a need to connect to people in ways that they may not have gotten growing up, right? Interesting stuff. Moon and Taurus. If you're a Moon and Taurus, typically what you might have experienced is you grew up in a household where there was always things, there was also material things, but you sometimes had to earn them. You may have grown up in a house where like your parent, your mother figure maybe was very, her possessions. She was very strict or very into her possessions. Now it could mean she was very much like, don't touch this, don't touch that. Okay, that could be a Virgo mom, or a Capricorn mom would be more like structure, but you also, it could be a mom who just has a lot of nice things, or a parent, like your mom has really nice jewelry. She has a lot of artifacts. She's really into the visual of things, right? So you grow up in a setting where there's a lot to do with things. There's a lot around the household. There's a lot of possessions. In an extreme way, you could have a person where like the mother could have been a hoarder, right? But in a less extreme way, it simply can mean you had a lot of things in your household. Like you had a lot of, either you were given a lot of possessions, and now again, for some people, it can be an it could be overkill where like the person who's like, yeah, growing up, I had all the things I needed, but I didn't have the same relationship I wanted with my parents, or I didn't have this, or I didn't have that. So you grow up in a setting where there's some theme around possessions and things like that. Now, of course, if someone has moon square Saturn, or a person has other indicators in the chart where they had a lack of something, that could be a situation where you grew up wanting and yearning for more possessions and things that you weren't able to accumulate. But typically, even in the household, like the moon charts, okay, you might even you had a lot of food, you had a lot of sustenance. There were things in the household that you had. And so as an adult, you now have to, it's going to be interesting. Like, do you navigate things differently based on what you have to earn yourself? And so that's where sometimes people who have a lot of Taurus energy, your parents that are very giving, or people who your parents work really hard to provide for you, because now as an adult, you have to meet that same level. If your parent really was like, oh yeah, took care of everything, you always had what you needed and wanted, and the parent has to teach sometimes depends on the placement of the moon and Taurus, this idea of values. But understand that some people have to still be taught the value of things that they have, right? It's not just, oh, it's a Taurus person, they're going to automatically value. It's a child, so you have to learn how to really help them navigate that. But as an adult, you now have to figure things out on your own. And so that can be very difficult for a person who can be materialistic or be very, have a lot of wants and needs and things that they want. If you grew up with that, but you don't know the value of work, you don't know the value of earning it. Typically, it is easier to teach a moon and Taurus person or child that early on. But again, it's all going to depend on what else is in the chart. Moon in Aries. If you have a moon in Aries, sometimes you have a dynamic in the household where there's always something going on. Or your parent is always expecting you to do a lot of things. They might expect a lot from you at an early age in terms of what you can handle. Like you might have been 10 or 8 years old cooking. You're 8 years old and you're responsible for making your own lunch. Whereas some people might have had parents that were making their own lunch, right? You might have grown up in your mother figure. Your mother could have been very much your number one cheerleader or supporter, but like sometimes may have imposed on you or expected you to really be someone who is self-sufficient, someone who is independent. You might have grown up. So Aquarius kind of feels independent because sometimes they feel like a little bit odd and man out. They have to kind of like navigate feeling different and navigate experiences. Whereas Aries, it's more like you are viewed, right, as someone that is able to just get things done. Now, the moon in Aries, ironically, sometimes, even though they are seen that way, grow up in an environment where there's also this level of like being, is Aries like the other thing sometimes like there's a lot of like babying. I don't want to say babying, but there's always going to be this like, protective nature, but this kind of like you can do no wrong type of energy. So sometimes moon and Aries people can grow up in those types of environments. And sometimes it can be good because it's nurturing, but sometimes it can be bad if they're not held accountable for your actions, right? So remember the moon in Aries energy has to be active, even with the moon. That's why you find a lot of moon and Aries people who cannot stay still. They've got to be doing something. They got to be going here. They got to be going there. They're typically not homebodies. Okay. Other fire moon signs, I would say they're not the. You would have grown up in an environment also where like you're expected to do things. Though you may be, not always held accountable for things, you're expected to get up and just go and do things. There are not a lot of things done for you. So a lot of times these people tend to be self-sufficient at an early age. They might move out at an early age. They move away from their family at an early age. They've seen older, right? You do a lot of things earlier than some other people. Maybe you even do things a little bit earlier than your siblings, right? Because of this energy with this moon in Aries. And so it could also be like the family member that moved out. Your other sibling is still living at home, right? The moon in Aries person is going to sometimes have a different inner need to explore and identify who they are outside of the home. Remember, moon is the home, but Aries is very, very extroverted fire energy. So you could have grown up in an environment where you are expected to just be your own person. And sometimes it can cause issues if you feel like you didn't get the same level of support as someone else, right? if you're moon in Aries, also you might have grown up not feeling limited, like and so in adulthood you're not codependent. Now again, it'll depend on other aspects of your chart, but more than likely you're not going to be as codependent because early in life you were allowed to roam. You were a kid where maybe you didn't have a curfew or you didn't have to come home at a certain time, and if you did, you would likely rebel against that, right? Like it's hard to contain the moon in Aries. So Aries energy in general with children, it's hard because they can be impulsive or they can want what they want. And so you have to find ways to kind of still make them feel a little bit independent while still giving them boundaries and structure. Let's go. No, I'm not going in perfect zodiac order here. Moon in Pisces. If you have a moon in Pisces, these people can sometimes grip in an environment where there was a lot of focus on, you might have been treated or told that you had to be kind, or you had to be respectful, or you had to be nice to other people. You know, your mother figure could have been someone who tried to instill certain beliefs in you. Not in the same way Moon and Sag, a Moon Sag person would experience. But I think with the Moon in Pisces, it also could be, you could have a mother who is very spiritual. She could be spiritual. She might be into some spiritual things. She might be, I think about the fact my son's a Moon in Pisces. I'm an astrologer, a tarot reader, right? Like that's his experience, right? It's going to be like, but the mom or your environment opens you up to being sensitive. Somebody might help you navigate your sensitivity. And what I mean by that is, it is very hard. Moon in Pisces is the most sensitive sign in the moon. It's the most sensitive moon. Most sensitive sign in general. It just is. It internalizes and soaks up everything. And I've talked about that many times with Moon in Pisces, and there's a lot of potential there, but it is a sign I think most people have to do a lot of work with, right? If they have that in their placement. But I also think that it is important who you are around, because if you're a Moon in Pisces, but you are constantly dealing with being hurt, constantly being emotionally abused, that can happen with some people with this placement, depending on what else in the chart. So for some people, that can be their experience. They're very sensitive, but they weren't raised in a household where that was accepted, accepted. Especially if you're someone who, especially a lot of times the way, boys are socialized, oh, you can't be sensitive. Why are you crying? And of course there are times of crying. There's times where it's like, we have to teach our children, male or female, like the way to process, and what the kid doesn't know what's a big deal and what's not. They don't know yet, right? They don't know that it's different to cry because you're physically hurt versus crying because you can't get the last slice of pizza, right? There's a difference from crying because somebody hurt your feelings versus crying because you can't play with your toy because you have to go to bed. There are differences for that. And of course, there's people who are child psychologists that have more awareness of how to deal with all that. But the point that I'm making is, the Moon in Pisces person, it's important. You're going to deal with sensitivity no matter what. So hopefully you have a sensitive parent who allows you to, they understand you. They're empathetic. That's the biggest thing with the Moon in Pisces child. They need a parent who is empathetic and who truly understands them to help them navigate the sensitivity. And so if you're Moon in Pisces, your environment, there's something sensitive about it. And for most, hopefully it's not a bad thing, but it's something where you are encouraged to open up. And it doesn't always have to mean it's your mother. Like, you might be listening to this and you're like, well, that didn't happen with me. But it could have been like your older sister or someone else in your family where it was like, wow, this person did listen to me. This person was empathetic. Like, that's how I learned that it's okay for me to process how I feel. But sometimes it could also be, like I said before, the mother is very spiritual. The mother is very into, things that are more esoteric in nature. There's more openness about those types of things within your household. There's an allowance of you to kind of explore and understand the world in different ways. You aren't at shut down. Some parent shut you down. Like, no, why are you using your imagination? Like, you just need to go get your grades and that's it. And again, grades are important, so that is an educator. But I think the Moon in Pisces experience, you benefit from having a parent or somebody in the household that is in some way in tune with you, who is sensitive to your needs, even if they're not a very sensitive person. But if that parent can understand your needs and help you and help guide you and be empathetic towards you, hopefully you have that type of experience growing up. But sensitivity is going to be the key word for what you experience growing up if you have a Moon in Pisces. And hopefully, it's good for how your family dealt with that. When a Gemini person grows up with some type of influence of a parent who's likely either very talkative, speech is a theme, or a parent who's very much into school, like a parent who's like helped shaped you. It's like if someone's like, oh yeah, I work in education because my mom was a teacher, or I work in this field because my parent, growing up, they taught me a lot about this. So a lot of times with Moon and Gemini people, there is, you grow up in a setting where language speaking is important. You might be in a very loud family. Some people, maybe you grew up in a very loud family. Maybe you're Moon and Gemini, but you have Leo in the fourth house somewhere, and something, planet in there. You grow up in a very verbose family, like we speak a lot, we talk a lot, and that would help you. And again, some people can be argumentative. Don't get me wrong. You have Mars in that fourth house, right? And so it's arguing, right? But at the same time, what I would say is that Moon and Gemini process feelings through discussing, through talking, getting more information so they know how to feel. So for you, your upbringing could have been one in which you felt like you had to do a lot. Like a lot of your memories are also going to be probably attached to the conversations you had with people, what they said to you. It's not always going to be like what they did or what you wish they did. Moon and Gemini, a lot of the conversations you're going to see with the Moon and Gemini person, notice how a lot of times they speak a lot about what was said. A lot of the conversation, the dialogue, right? What I said, this is what you said, right? This is a very important to the emotional needs of Moon and Gemini. So your environment typically, and also Moon and Gemini, there's a theme with siblings. Could be, doesn't always have to be good though. You have Moon square Uranus, and it could mean you have an estrangement from siblings or something of that nature. But the Moon in Gemini, there is going to be some theme there around siblings, children, other people's kids, things of that nature. Like you grow up in a setting where like there's even extended family, right? There's some theme there where you are someone who is engaging a lot with other people who are your age, or like that is where your experience stems from. So the Moon and Gemini person, yeah, it depends on other placements, but there's typically going to be like an awareness of self and others through the dialogue and the conversations and things that you have. Communication is going to be very important. Growing up, you might be like, yeah, growing up, me and my cousin had to do homework together. Growing up, me and my siblings, we had to do this. Growing up, our parents made us read every day. We had to do our homework. Like there's going to be themes there that are very Gemini-like in terms of that. Again, I'm not going in order. Moon in Leo. You get a lot of attention, but sometimes it's not the attention you want, right? Like you might, for example, Moon in Leo might grow up feeling like, why is my parent always on me? Why are they always asking me to clean up? They didn't ask my sibling. Or growing up, you might feel like, wow, why is my parent always trying to tell me what to do? So Moon in Leo grows up, you find there's a lot of attention on you. I know someone who's Moon in Leo, they're an only child, so that was the way the attention was on them. Some people with Moon in Leo grow up and they feel like, wow, the spotlight is always on me, and it makes me feel really emotional because I'm always the one that I feel like my parent or my mom is on about certain things. Just like that Moon in Aquarius, what did I say? Feels different sometimes. The Moon in Leo, the opposite sign, gets attention, but it's not always for the things they want attention for. And again, it could be as extreme as somebody that's like a stage parent, and they want their kid to be the best athlete on the field. So there's constantly pushing on that child to be a good athlete, or pushing on that child to be, sometimes you have the little pageant queens. Like the Moon in Leo, you grow up feeling like there's always a lens on you. There's always this kind of spotlight on you. And again, when it's good because maybe you are very talented in something. You feel like your parent gives you that adoration, gives you that support, sees the bright light in you. Maybe you do suffer from some self-conscious things within yourself, but your mother is like, oh, you're so beautiful. Oh, you're so great, right? But some people can have a different experience. Now, when I always give the other side, it is because pros and cons of every sign. There is no perfect sign. There is no perfect anything, right? So we have to always look at the possibilities and the range. So some Moon in Leo people are like, yeah, I got the attention, but it wasn't what I wanted. So you grow up in a setting where, and so what happens when you're older is you either grow up needing more attention because the kind you got wasn't what you really wanted it for. So that's when you can get people who are a little bit, again, it will depend on what other placements are in the chart, who are a little bit more forceful in showing up in the world, right? A little bit more, give me the attention I didn't get when I was a child. Whereas some people, if they've been raised in a way, or they have done a healing and they're very confident, they end up just being like, okay, I know what I'm good at, and these are things I'm going to seek opportunities to be praised for those things, right? So it really just depends on the person's confidence level. All right, so let's see who else we got. Moon and Virgo. Okay, the Moon and Virgo. The Moon and Virgo person can sometimes grow up in a setting. They're going to grow up in a situation where there's often a tendency for them to feel like they are constantly dealing with some type of desire and need to solve a problem or fix something. If you grew up in a household where it can be, your parent could be solutions based on like always wanting to figure out a solution. It could be your mother, it could be someone in the family, but there's always this kind of focus on fixing something, a solution to something. Something needs to be resolved. Now, again, when I say that you're the Moon in Virgo, I'm not saying your parent is gonna be act like a Virgo. That's not what this is about. You're the Moon in Virgo. What I'm saying is the environment that you have, the environment that you grow up in can be one in which you constantly feel there's something that has to be put in order, something that has to be fixed. Some people, the extreme could be the Moon Virgo child who has a sick parent. The parent always needs something. The parent, is ill. You can see that sometimes with 6th house, 12th house energy, but also Pisces, Virgo, that opposite sign energy there. But Moon and Virgo child may also deal with a lot of times a parent who has a lot of just like health needs, or someone who's very into health. Someone who is very much like, oh, no, we have to eat this. You have to eat this because this is going to be better for you. Or a parent that is very good with keeping up with the kids, dental records, the kids' doctor's appointments, right? So you grow up in that kind of system where you feel as though you're protected by the fact that your parent or someone else is arranging a lot of things for you. And so sometimes when you get older, that can be good because you're already used to it, unless you are someone that has moon squares, moon oppositions, or other elements in your chart that can make it difficult for you in adulthood to feel like you can measure up to what your parent did for you. This desire and need for things to be in order, this desire for things to be perfect. And then you can get into relationships, and that can sometimes cause an issue because especially people Moon and Virgo, like when you cohabitate with someone, I've said this before and I'll say it again. The Moon in Virgo has a greater need for order than the Sun in Virgo. The Sun is what we are projecting. Virgo is projecting these traits. The Moon needs it to be that way. The Sun just is that. I hope that makes sense. So the Moon and Virgo person can get into relationships and just be like, oh no, I grew up with it like this and like that. And you have to learn how to merge with another person. And you sometimes have to learn the way that your parent might have had very particular ways. Your parent can be very picky, very particular about the way things have to be. And then you grow up in the world, you go off to college or whatever, and you have a roommate, and you're like, wait, my parents said you had to do it like this. It's like, well, you could do it like this, right? So sometimes Moon and Virgo can grow up in a setting where there's these specific ways, or you have to do things where you're raised in a setting where things are a certain way. And it's sometimes hard for you to kind of get out of that and discover your own routines, discover the way you really want to do things, what actually makes you feel comfortable because you feel so loyal to doing things the way that your household did, which is very interesting, the Moon and Virgo. All right, so Moon and Libra. All right, so the Moon and Libra, you could have grown up in a household where there was this, you always had to be around someone. You always had to be doing something for someone. It could be Moon and Libra. Some people grew up, oh, I had to take care of my younger sibling. Like that was my built-in best friend. Or it's like I grew up and I was always with my mom. I was always with my dad. I was always with someone. Moon and Libra finds it very hard to be away from the people that they grew up around. Whether it's a cousin, something like that. Moon and Libra likes to feel a level of being involved with someone else in a way that can let them feel that they're not completely alone. Libra is not an emotional sign. It's an air sign. But with the Moon in Libra, there is a deeper need, an inner need to be a part of something. So sometimes it can be, no matter what, you feel like you have to be attached to something. But you also can grow up in a household where there's codependence. It could be you grew up in an environment where you saw that. Maybe your parent was codependent on the other parent or something of that regard. So sometimes your experience as a Moon Libra person is you're growing up, and it could be positive. Sometimes you may grow up and you've seen a very equal relationship or a positive relationship. Now, again, it doesn't have to be your parents. Maybe you were raised by your grandparents and you're like, wow, I grew up seeing this is what a marriage looks like. But now as an adult, I'm not seeing this in my own life. Like I'm not getting that same result. And so the thing we have to understand about our moon sign is it sets us up for something that may not always be reality in our adulthood. Or in our adulthood, we have to create that space. We have to create what that looks like for ourselves, right? Because we can come into the world as an adult and have these expectations. But again, our life is our own. We are not our parents. And so therefore, we do have to decide, what does it look like for you, me as an adult? And so it was Moon and Libra. You have this idea, almost this idealism sometimes of like going into like, wait a minute, I thought it was going to be like this. Or you could have had a situation where you thought things would be better as you got older. You could be like, when I was younger, I thought relationships were like this, or I thought best friends were like this, right? You grow up in this setting or this mindset of like, it'll get better when I get older, or this is what I'm going to see when I get older. So sometimes Moon and Libra can struggle in that regard of like dealing with the codependency or dealing with an ideal that they saw growing up, this fairness in a relationship or this fairness in a situation, or you have, again, people who, a lot of Moon Libra, you grew up with like, oh, my cousin, my brother, my sister, or this, my neighbor, like I always had this person. And then sometimes you can struggle a little bit later when you have a different environment where you have to be completely alone, or not completely alone, but like you don't know anyone. You move to a new town, you take on you go to college and you don't know anybody. Again, it's a learning lesson for you to really understand how to be yourself without these predetermined relationships. So Moon and Libra, you sometimes have a lot of predetermined relationships in your life that are easier when you're younger, but when you're older, you have to learn navigate that on your own. Now, the Moon in Cancer can grow up in a situation where there's a lot of focus. There's a lot of focus on the parental figure, the mother figure, being cared for, being taken care of. Moon in Cancer energy does tend to sometimes need and desire a female figure. If it is not the mother, it is typically someone else. It could be the grandmother or something like that. Moon in Cancer is often sometimes protected by someone. Sometimes it can even be the other parent. Right, but the Moon in Cancer person is in a space where there tends to be a level of they're secure, or there's a level of there's somebody there taking on the maternal role. You grow up sometimes feeling like you are emotionally poured into, but sometimes what happens is with that Moon in Cancer energy is that you also grow up in a situation where you attach yourself a lot to the people in your life. And when you get older, it becomes a little bit harder to separate yourself. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but you grow up so much feeling bonded and connected to and loyal to people in your family that sometimes you can struggle sometimes to have other bonds with other people in a way. And you can have a lot of expectations for people because the Moon in Cancer energy, there's always this need. And sometimes you make excuses for people in your family, because your need for you to feel accepted by your family is greater when you are a Moon in Cancer person. It is way greater than if you are Moon in Aquarius or even a Moon in Sagittarius person who can kind of say, well, forget you, right? That is not really what a Moon in Cancer person can do. There is always going to be this level of needing this familial connection or a connection to people that feel like family. So with the Moon in Cancer, I think you grow up in an environment where there is like somebody took on the role for you. Yes, like sometimes people don't grow up with their biological parents, but you grow up in this kind of sense of emotional support and these people who are someone's caring for you. But some people can have a wound there but you there's something missing, but it's hard for you to really explain and express that when you feel like you have to be loyal to your family or your mother, whoever. And so when an adulthood, what sometimes happens, Moon in Cancer energy, yes, it's beautiful to be connected to home and family and to be loyal, but you also sometimes have to learn who you are away from that, right? Who are you away from your family? Are you someone different? Are there certain things you're doing because you feel this kind of commitment to people, but have these people always done what is best for you? And you have to kind of do what's best for yourself. And so that can be sometimes the issue with the environment you grow up around. Sometimes, you're used to being from a certain place. You want to stay home. You want to stay with people. But sometimes Moon in Cancer, if they're trying to be more independent, they benefit from moving away a little bit or doing something on their own. And that can be sometimes difficult. But they're always going to return back. Home and family is always going to be important to Moon in Cancer. This loyalty to family, even if things are difficult at some point in time. All right, so we did Leo, Moon in Scorpio. A lot of Moon Scorpio people have dealt with some type of intense emotional experiences growing up. It can mean They grew up with somebody who was very intense, someone that was abusive, someone that was very much or intense worker. Like, oh, my mom was always working. Like, she didn't have time for us, but she made sure we had clothes on our back, right? Moon and Scorpio people can also be like, there was a desire for them to be something. So it doesn't always have to mean someone grew up in it was an abusive household. I just give you all the range of sometimes what trends that we've seen, right, in astrology. But Moon and Scorpio can also be, you grew up in a family that put a lot of pressure on you to become something. Like, it's like the minute you were born, you had to be like move from like a caterpillar to a butterfly. Moon and Scorpio can sometimes feel there's a lot of internal pressure to overcome things, whether it's overcoming poverty or overcoming like your parents' failures, right? Your parent didn't make it to the major leagues. Your parent didn't make it to professional sports. Your parent didn't make it in the entertainment industry. Your parent wasn't able to finish their degree because they got, pregnant with you, whatever, right? And so a lot of Moon and Scorpio people, you grow up where like you can be very successful, especially depending on what else is in the chart. But there's a lot of pressure around you sometimes, and it can be good because sometimes without that pressure, you wouldn't have been as great as you are. So it's not always a bad thing. I don't want to paint this as this like horrible experience for people, but this is sometimes what can happen. Yeah. Moon and Capricorn. You might have grown up in a household where I see this a lot. Your mother is typically a very hard worker. She might not even get many breaks. Your mother figure she's typically a hard worker. Now, again, I'm not talking about the sun. So you're like, well, my father was, I'm talking about the moon right now. Okay, and I have videos I talk about the father. I talk about that. But you grow up in this sense of, I have an idea for the sun one. I'm going to talk about the sun in your environment. I'm going to talk about the moon right now. But you grow up in this kind of sense of like, wow, you are always in, all of like the things that have the mothers to do. Now, again, for some people, you grow up and it's hard though to emotionally connect. You might feel like, you're taught and you're shown how to really be a person who was responsible. That Moon and Capricorn mother is very structured. I mean, your Moon and Capricorn, you grew up in an environment that's very structured. There's a lot of rules. There's like this level of discipline even as well. You know the rules very well, so you follow them typically depending on what's in your chart. But at the same time, you sometimes, some people can feel the disconnect emotionally, right? Because you can sometimes feel like a lot of like, it's like the person who made it. You made it because like your mom or your family poured into you and they made sure you had everything. They taught you how to be responsible and they made sure you made it through high school. But you can sometimes lack on the emotional level. Again, it will depend. So people who have more positive synastry between them and their parent might not have a negative experience just because there's a Moon in Capricorn. And I'm not saying the Moon in Capricorn is a negative experience, but remember, the Moon is in detriment in Capricorn. And so there, sometimes your nurturing feels different than it might for another person. And actually that might be exactly what you need. Each person is different, but Moon in Capricorn, like, it's very important for us to understand like that is going to be your environment. Like you aren't allowed to fail. You might feel like you're in an environment, but sometimes some people, that's what you need. You didn't grow up in a household that was a mess. Moon and Capricorn people, your parent, now it's time to talk about the Moon and Mom, your household was structured. And by structure, I mean, you weren't like, I'm moving from place to place. It wasn't like, oh, we don't know where we're going to get food on the table. Whatever had to happen, your mom made sure it happened. In that environment, maybe it was grandma, grandfather, I don't know, you live with somebody, right? They made sure that stuff got done. And so your environment was structured, but it also could have meant like you lacked certain things. Because remember, Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. There could have been a lack, whether it was emotional support, whether it was, you had what you needed, you didn't always have what you wanted. It could mean there was a lack of some type of, like, maybe you didn't have vacations growing up, you didn't go on family vacation, you didn't have money for that. You might have had the things you wanted, needed, but hey, you didn't have money for this. You could have grown up in a place where it's like the house needed to be fixed, but you weren't able to do it. Your parent wasn't able to do it. They were just able to do what was needed. So that can sometimes also be the case.